All right, so today we're hanging out with this 20-ton York unit. I believe it's about 20 years old. Let's double check the data tag here. Blah, 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 20 ton. Looks like it's 01, so roughly 20 years old. Now, I was originally out here to quote a replacement. I'm not sure what happened, but the customer decided to just go ahead and start repairing it. When we quote units, we don't charge for the quoting process. So when I was here originally to quote the unit, I wasn't allocated the time and money needed to actually diagnose the unit. So when they decided to just have us come back and start the repairing process, I explained that it may be a multi-layered process because I don't know what's wrong with it yet. As you can tell, our disconnect is off. So I said I'll go back there as long as I have a few components, just a handful of random stuff. When I was here originally, you'll see some boxes laying down there. When I was here originally, I did open up the panels, look around, do sort of a visual inspection, and I did find a lot of new components have been thrown at it. So I don't know really what I'm getting into, but I just wanted to have a couple, like a flame rod, sparker, all that stuff, just to have on hand. All right, let's get a little bit of a closer look at what we're dealing with here. Our main control section, nothing too crazy. Ice cube relay just kind of flopping around. That's not real cool. We'll have to put a zip screw in there and hold it down. Notice right here, I really don't like when people do that. If you for whatever reason need to cut a wire like that, just put a piece of tape over it, trim it back up or something. I mean, again, they do make jumpers that you can just magnetically click onto those terminals right there. Or what I've done before is I'll just trim a little bit of the wire right up next to the terminal, just so, it doesn't look like garbage like this. Let's see, relays over there look good. And again, guys, I did this when I was initially here, just sort of visually inspected everything. When I was here originally, I did test it for any shorted out components, and I didn't find any. There's our freeze stat right there. We got some fuses back there. That's all right. Ignition control module. What do we got here? Some sort of control board. Now, this is where the magic happens right here. Say we got an old sequencer. I think it's a sequencer anyway. Insulation is shot. Now this unit did have a new exchanger installed right here, 12.4 of 18, and I did verify last time I was here the heat exchanger does look fine in this unit, so I'm not worried about that at all. That wiring is a little bit of a rat's nest, just a little bit. Another thing, look at this. Why would you not just put that wiring back in the proper location? I mean, did you not have 4 seconds to spare? You know what I mean? Don't take the path of least resistance through your day, Looks like our frame was modified to accommodate this new gas valve, so that gas valve's not original. I'm guessing either the manufacturer no longer makes that gas valve, or whoever was here just slapped a universal one in there. We'll have to see if that works. You see our sparker right there. It's not supposed to flop around like that. That looks decent, nothing crazy. Belt's good, nice and tight. No abnormal wear on the pulley. Keyway looks good. Bearing looks good. I mean, there's no play in it. Right here, this is where our freeze stat apparently must have failed, so they just cut it and bypassed it. Alright guys, I didn't get any footage of this, but I wasn't able to actually get that flame sensor reattached from where I'm at. I just can't get my arms in there. So what I've done is I labeled all these wires. See right there, my little orange dot system. I labeled all the wires, took pictures, and I'm just gonna pull this whole burner assembly out because it looks like once I break this union here, this whole thing will just come right out, and then I can, you know, reattach it and slide it back in there and kind of see what's going on. By the way, I already loosened that. That wasn't on there hand tight. I was hoping that I'd get tangled up in some wires. I was really hoping for that. There we are. Now, since I have this burner assembly out and I do have new sparkers and flame rods, I am going to replace them, not knowing if they're good or bad. Chances are they're good, because these are usually pretty, these are pretty tough. Unless the ceramic breaks, there's really not a problem with the flame rods. Usually with these, they do get old, I guess. They can kind of get dirty, but for the most part, I don't replace a lot of these, honestly. I find they're pretty tough. But since I don't want to have to put this thing back in there and find out that something's wrong, what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the flame rods, the sparkers, again, since I have new ones. And then I'm also going to go through and just take a wire brush and clean up the surface of this pilot tube, because that is what the sparker sparks against. So on these systems, guys, make sure you put the spark igniter in the right position. I just about put my spark igniter up here before I realized up here is the end of the pilot. Down here is the beginning of the pilot tube. So obviously I want it to spark over here first, because if I don't, I'm gonna have gas spewing out of this pilot, building up behind here until it finally hits the spark igniter, which would have been over here. So I don't want to make an explosion. Not today, anyway. All right, real quick, guys. This might be kind of hard to see, but if you looked right here, so this right here is our spark igniter. And as I was installing this, I accidentally lined it up with the wrong hole. So what somebody did at some point in time is they just used probably a self-tapper and they made a second hole underneath of this. Now, what that did, and I don't know how it really affected the operation of the unit, but essentially what that did is that took this spark igniter and it just made it point at a slight angle. Chances are it still worked fine, but you know, obviously it wasn't designed that way, so you might get a little bit of intermittent spark issues. If it's too far off kilter, it might not be close enough to this pilot tube to actually make a spark. All right, guys, so my OCD is sort of getting to me since I've been cleaning up a lot of left behind trash in this unit. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna vacuum out this burner section, just get all the dust and crap out of there, because all of this dust and crap is gonna end up on my flame rod, on my sparker. It's gonna get into the burners, and I just don't want that to happen. So we're gonna vacuum it out real quick. All right, much better. Let's get these out of the way. We'll slide this burner back in place and see what happens. As you can tell, the burner assembly's back in place. I'm pretty sure I have it wired up correctly. Got my Molex connectors reinstalled, all my wiring cleaned up, zip tied, ready to go. I don't see anything that needs to be addressed as of this moment. So let's fire it up, see if we have a call for heat, and see what it does. Inducer's on. See if we can hear some sparking. And we have ignition on one of the circuits. I still hear sparking on what I believe is the second circuit. So this circuit, definitely hot, definitely ignition. This one, nothing. Real quick, I just want to double check to make sure I do have a W2 call. I believe black is my common, still 25 volts. So we do have a call for W2. So what I'm going to do first, guys, I'm going to put the camera down and just double check all my wiring. Make sure it wasn't something silly that I missed. All right, so let me do that real quick. Before I forget, guys, second tech tip of the day, something that AC Service Tech, formerly your mama, had pointed out to me online. What I've done before on these when I'm checking heat or anything, what I'll do normally is I'll just kick my disconnect off in the middle of a heat cycle, which is a big no-no. And mostly that is because once you do that, your heat exchanger is still hot and there's no air moving over it. So you're probably going to trip your high limit. So what you want to do instead is just find a way to disconnect or stop the heating signal, whether that's taking a jumper wire and initiating a call for heat so you can easily disconnect your jumper wire and stop the unit from heating. But whatever you do, you want to keep that blower running and you want to stop the unit from igniting. You could even go over to the gas valve and shut the gas valves off if you want, or shut the gas off, whatever you want to do. But as long as you stop it from heating and keep the blower going, so you keep air going across that heat exchanger so nothing happens. Let's do a quick recap, guys. So here's what I did. I double checked all my wiring going to my ice cube relays, W1, W2, my inducer, all of that looks fine. And then I double checked all the wiring going into my rollout switch right back there, which I originally called a sequencer. It is not a sequencer, of course, just kind of looks like one. I double checked all the wiring going to my inducer or my ignition modules down to my gas valves. That's all correct. And then I chased voltage from my ice cube relays over to my rollout switch, over to my ignition modules, and down to the gas valves. As far as I can tell, I have proper voltages coming out of the ignition modules down to the gas valves, but just to be 100% sure, I flip-flopped the ignition modules, and the problem still stayed with this burner section, which I believe is number 2. That one down there is number 1. Down there, that one's fired up every single time. That one I have no issue with. It's just this one. So what I'm getting out of this one is just a faint sparking nonstop. So I believe my pilot isn't getting any gas. So I pulled off the pilot adjustment screw, and inside the little tiny screw that's in there, looks pretty beat up, like it's been adjusted like a million times. This pilot tube looks like trash. It's kind of kinked over a little bit. Not bad, doesn't seem like it's leaking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pilot off and use my manometer down there, and just to see if I have gas pressure, see if it's actually opening or not. I don't smell any gas when it's trying to ignite, so I don't really know what to make of that. And while I have it off, I'm also going to blow that pilot out with some nitrogen, assuming that I do have actual gas pressure coming out of there. Let's pull this off, hook up the manometer, and see what we got. All right, let's turn it on and see what happens. Inducer is on. The door blower should be on in just a moment. So if you notice right there, we do have gas coming out of the pilot tube. As you can tell, we had pressure coming out of our pilot tube. So what I'm going to do now is go get my nitrogen, blow out that pilot tube, reattach it, and see if we can get that pilot tube to ignite, or that pilot light to ignite. I didn't feel like dragging my nitrogen tank up here, so I just got my gallo gun, my drain shot gun, whatever you want to call it. So what you're looking at is this rollout switch. Now, I didn't pay close enough attention initially, but I'm pretty sure it's basically bypassed. So what we have over here, this black wire and this red wire are coming from our control section. This is our 24 volts coming off of either one of our ice cube relays, R1 or W1 and W2 essentially. And so what happens, so we have 24 volts coming in both sides of this, which is confusing. And then these two top terminals are connected. The bottom two are connected. So it's basically, top one is, we'll say rollout switch number 1, bottom one is rollout switch number 2. So what happens in this situation is 24 volts comes in on my black and red wire, goes through this top bimetal, give you a better look there, and then it comes over to this side where 24 volts goes out to this green wire, which is connected to my rollout switch on ignition module number 1, and then this other side is, of course, just jumper down to the bottom. And this jumper takes 24 volts over to my TH terminal on number 1 ignition, and then it goes through here, and then it goes over to my TH control on number 2. So, I mean, it's still going to do the same thing if this unit goes into rollout, you know, exchanger cracks and flames start shooting out the front. It is still going to break the 24 volts, but it's just not wired up properly. This black wire needs to be down on this bottom terminal, so I'm basically on both separate sections. I don't really need this jumper wire. I don't know why that's there. So let me show you what I'm talking about on the schematic. Luckily, we have a somewhat easy to read schematic. So here's our number, or W2 rollout switch number 2. Let's see, 24 volts. I'll double check that. It looks like it's coming off of our centrifugal switch. IR number 2. Right here is my rollout switch. So I have 160, which is my black, which comes from the relay, and it goes to one side. So as you can tell, on one side of my rollout switch should be black 460, not 160, 460, and one side of that will go up to my TH terminal. The other side goes through the bimetal over to rollout switch number 1 on the ignition module. No, we can leave that there, and that's my rollout switch. This one, need to get that off there. Alright guys, so I think I got it. Let me double check before I start talking. Alright, so W1 incoming power comes down on this line. This other red wire, which is tied into it, goes over to our TH on ignition module number 1. Then it comes through this bimetal, assuming that it's not on fire, and then it goes over to our rollout switch number 1. And then on this back side here, black, which is our W2, comes in, and there's a jumper right here, so it goes over to this white wire, which is connected to TH terminal on our number 2 ignition module. Of course, assuming that this is closed, it will go through here, and then it will go over to our rollout switch on number 2. Let's fire it up to see if anything crazy happens. Alright, ignition on unit circuit number 1. Circuit number 2 is still dead. I have 25 volts on my rollout switch. On my ignition module. So I do have proper power going into my ignition module, and I can hear it sparking. So right now I'm just going to go back to assuming that there's an issue with that gas valve. Most likely an issue with the gas pressure coming out of that pilot orifice. I'm going to do a little bit of research and see if I can figure out what the gas pressure coming out of that pilot tube or out of the pilot side of the gas valve should be, because I honestly have no idea. And then I might just go ahead and replace that gas valve just because the pilot gas pressure has been adjusted so many times, and also that pilot gas pressure too, or that pilot tube I don't like. This pilot tube, I just don't like this brass fitting. I don't like this kink right here. It's just a place it could leak eventually, or crack and break off and cause all sorts of fun problems. Anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up and get out of here. Submit a quote, get some parts, and we'll see you guys when I return, all right?